Hello, welcome to the Daily Bible Podcast. My name is William Hemsworth. Thank you so much for joining me for today's show. Well, we are slowly but surely working our way through Matthew chapter 16. Today we're going to look at verses 5 through 7. So again, Matthew chapter 16, verses 5 through 7, and those verses say, "When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, 'Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees.' And they discussed it among themselves, saying, 'We brought no bread.'" So this episode takes place after the Pharisees and the Sadducees demand Jesus for a sign of who he is. And so Jesus and the disciples go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. The disciples didn't bring anything to eat. They didn't bring any bread. And so Jesus kind of hears this and says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And the disciples think that he is talking, literally, they're totally misinterpreting this metaphor. And they're asking themselves, like, oh my goodness, is this because we didn't bring any bread? Is this why he's saying this? So leaven is that key component in any baking, yeast, if you will. In any baking that makes something rise, whether it's a cake, a cookie, bread, whatever. You have to have the right quantity of leaven to make something rise appropriately. If you have a bad batch of yeast, it's going to taste gross. It's going to be kind of rock hard probably. It's not going to rise appropriately, etc. So Jesus is telling the disciples, beware of this bad leaven, this bad yeast that the Pharisees and Sadducees are teaching. Their disregard for basic humanity, their lack of compassion, their lack of mercy, their total rigidness to the law. And that rigidness is making them lose track of what the law was meant to be. They're following the letter rather than the spirit. Jesus is warning the disciples against that. And in the coming verses that we're going to look at tomorrow, Jesus rebukes the disciples for them thinking that it's because he brought no bread. And we'll read about that tomorrow. But I think what Jesus is saying applies to us today as well as Christians. Beware of the leaven. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Beware of their lack of compassion. Beware of their lack of mercy. Beware of their lack for basic humanity. Whether it's within our faith, whether it's within politics, etc., sometimes we get carried away by the letter of the law and we miss the spirit. We lose track that people are people and everyone deserves God's mercy, and sometimes that mercy is shown through us. So let's go forth today. Be that light of Christ to the world. Let's show that grace, that mercy, that compassion. Let's be Christ. Granted, we're all going to mess up, but let's be that good representative of Christ to those we meet. Let's not be like the Pharisees and Sadducees. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Daily Bible Podcast. Join us tomorrow as we continue on in Matthew chapter 16. And thank you for joining me. Have a great day.